Hello and welcome to a new episode of Dragons Are Real. My name is Pete Jones. I'm testing out a new microphone for this recording, so we'll see if it's improved over past episodes. This is a Samsung Go mic as recommended by Liren from Updates from the Middle of Nowhere, so hopefully this goes well. Today I'm going to talk about Dragon Warriors, which is another series of game books which were a competitor to the Fighting Fantasy books. If you want to know more about the Fighting Fantasy books, then check out the Purple Worm podcast, where we've discussed these in detail from episode 4 onwards. Want to hear a podcast from 4 British blokes, and from that 4 anchorites? Then the Purple Worm podcast just might be for you. Featuring myself from the Dragons Are Real, Dave Aldrich from D Percentile, Colin Green from Spike Pit, and John Large from Red Dice Diaries. The Purple Worm podcast is 4 British blokes talking RPGs. Check it out at your local podcaster, your podcatcher. We're on Google Podcasts, we're on Spotify, Apple, anywhere you can find a podcast. We'll be there somewhere, so check us out. That's Purple Worm. So if you have caught the latest episodes of Purple Worm, myself, John, Colin and Dave were discussing the Fighting Fantasy game books. And what I thought I'd do today is look at an alternative that came out to Fighting Fantasy, which was the Dragon Warrior game books. Fighting Fantasy came out in 1982, and Dragon Warriors, written by Dave Morris and Oliver Johnson, was an alternative gamebook system which was released on Corgi Books, which was a competitor to Puffin Books that Fighting Fantasy was released on. And the Dragon Warriors books came out between 1985 and 1986 and were set in the fantasy world of legend. It was a set of 6 books, and the first 3 books were released simultaneously. Book 1, Dragon Warriors, was the core rules. Book 2 was the Way of Wizardry, which introduced magic, spells and potions. And Book 3 was the Elven Crystals, which was 3 long adventure scenarios. So this was ideal to get people up and running straight away. So what was Dragon Warriors' system? Well, unlike Fighting Fantasy, which went for a nice simple system, which used the ubiquitous D6, which people could steal from their Monopoly or their Risk games, Dragon Warriors used polyhedral dice, which was a good thing for role players, but was also its Achilles heel, because people back in those days had trouble getting a polyhedral dice. They weren't lying around, so they had to mail order some polyhedral dice or they couldn't play the game. This is probably one of the reasons why it didn't take off as well as Fighting Fantasy did. So the core mechanics was there was 5 stats, which was strength, reflexes, intelligence, psychic talent and looks. And in the best tradition of role-playing games, you rolled 3d6 for each of those stats to get your initial stats. Then you choose a profession. Profession was classes from your regular RPGs. And initially there were 4 professions: Knight, Barbarian, Sorcerer and Mystic. Knights were all-round good fighters. Barbarians were good at attack but not so good in defence. Your Sorcerer was your arcane specialist for magic, and your Mystic was more of a nature type spell. Health was set by your class and was a d6 plus 7 points, for example, with a knight, or d6 plus 9 points for a barbarian. You also had a standard attack and defence, which was based on your class, and your attack value was more or less about double-ish what your defence value was. And then you had modifiers to your attack and defence depending on your attributes. You also had a magical attack and magic defense if you were a magician, and there was an evasion stat, which was a dodge. You started off at rank 1, which was equivalent to level 1, and you had fixed equipment levels. And the system was that for combat, the attacker took the attacking attribute, subtracted the defense attribute of the defender, and that was the number to hit on the score on a d20. If you did hit, there was an armor bypass roll, and basically each weapon had 2 stats. It had a dice type between d4 and d8, and a fixed damage, which was normally between 3 and 6 points. And if you did hit, you rolled the weapon type. Armour was between 0 and 5 points. Missile fire was slightly different. You rolled a d20 and tried to roll beneath your attack score. There were 2 magic systems. The arcane system, which was an attack roll similar to the combat, but you had a number of magic points. And the other difference was that magic used 2d10, not d20. And basically each spell had a speed of attack. You subtract the evasion number for the target, and that was your number to roll under, and you had to roll under or equal to for the spell to work. And as I said, sorcerers had magic points. At first level there are 4 magic points per day. The cost to cast a spell would be 1 per level of the spell, and you could only cast spells of your level or lower. There was, at first rank as a sorcerer, you had a choice of 6 spells. The mystics were slightly different, and they lost fatigue. They had fatigue on them for casting the spells. The later 3 books that were released was book 4 was Out of the Shadows, which introduced the assassin class. So it's just things as stealth, alchemy, martial arts, and transmagic. Book 5 was called The Power of Darkness, and that introduced the elemental class with new spells for them, which was more nature than the mystic, and introduced an epic adventure. And the final book, book 6, was The Lands of Legend, which introduced the warlock class and introducing the world of legend. I'll talk about legend in a minute. 2009, Mongoose released a core book of Dragon Warriors in hardback edition, which contained all the information in the 6 books. And in 2011, Serpent King Games re-released it. They've also released a few other editions, a bestiary, which had supplemental monsters from Legend and expanded treasure, Friends or Foes, which detailed 36 NPCs, and Elven Crystal Campaign, which took the scenario, the campaign setting from Book 3, Prince of Darkness, a separate release, which took the adventures from Book 5, and Sleeping Gods, which took adventures from Books 1, 2, 4 and 6. So, what was Legend? Well, Legend was a fantasy world based in culture of the medieval world. And you think of 13th century Europe, sort of the Crusades, you're not far wrong. It was steeped in myth, folklore, magic, superstition, and had 1,000-year-old history, and it is a rich background for holding any fantasy adventure on. Magic was very real, the church existed, and several churches existed, and there was like a feudal order. So Dragon Warriors is a very rich game, but as I said before, its Achilles heel was that if you didn't have the polyhedral dice, you were shut out of it. I've had some technical issues which has prevented me from not recording another podcast episode, but so editing it. The laptop that I normally use for doing all my editing using Audacity has got some sort of fault in it, and it keeps switching off randomly without warning. And I've tried to fix it, taking the laptop apart. It needs some new thermal paste on the CPU, I think. I think that's what's causing the problem. But a couple of the screws inside I've shredded, so I can't get some of the parts off inside, so I've had to order some more tools from interwebs to try and fix that. So yeah, let's put a kibosh on things at the moment. But hey, these things are sent to test us. I managed to get a game in with Jason from the Nerds Variety RPG podcast this weekend. He kindly ran a Colonial Gothic game, but using the ICRPG rules. Now, I love ICRPG. It's a nice, simple, light system. The mechanics get out of the way of the game and just let you immerse yourself in it. And it really did. We did have a couple of house rules that we were going to use, but in the excitement of the game and the immersion of it, we both completely forgot all about those rules. Not that it ruined the game at all. Jason is a good GM. He runs a good game. If you listen to his podcasts, he doesn't elude self-confidence and has a bit of self-doubt, but let me tell you, he does run a good game, and so he did on that today. He uses Roll20 a little differently. Instead of putting battle maps on, he just used some photographs of the period, which really help sell it and help with the theatre of the mind. The Colonial Gothic, for those that don't know, is set during the American War of Independence, or the American Revolution as they call it over there, and it's got a supernatural vibe to it. So it's nice to play a non-fantasy game for a change, something a bit historical. As you know, I like a bit of historical war games, as does Jason, so it sort of suits us both down to the ground. ICRPG is a great little rule set, and as Jason said on his podcast, it plays better than it reads, and you just forget all about the rules altogether. So we didn't finish the session. We only had a couple of hours window because I was doing some more recording, but we're hoping to continue it again tomorrow, so look forward to that, and maybe we'll conclude the adventure. So that was Colonial Gothic. Thanks, Jason, for running it. You have been listening to the Dragons Are Real podcast. My name is Pete Jones. You can find more information at my website at petejones.neocities.org or at my blog at dragonsarealpodcast.tumblr.com. The opening music was Fireflies and Stardust by Kevin MacLeod. The closing music, also by Kevin MacLeod, was Fretless